Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this BRLSI event. I'm pleased to be presenting it on-site from Bath Royal Literary and Scientific Institution, and I'm going to introduce Dr. Crispin Little. Could I please ask that everyone mute their microphones and not turn them on again until we get to the question and answers at the end. And when we get to that, I'll suggest a protocol for communicating. If you can keep your microphones muted, it will prevent background noises and such interfering with the speaker. And without further ado, I'll introduce Dr. Crispin Little. He's a senior lecturer in paleontology at the University of Leeds. He has a PhD in paleontology from the University of Bristol and completed postdoctoral work at the University of California, Los Angeles, and the Natural History Museum in London. Currently, he's head of the Paleo at Leeds Research Group and secretary of the Paleontological Association. So Google Scholar informs me that Dr. Little has published 122 academic articles, many in recent years focusing upon his deep interest in chemosynthetic communities. Those are communities that gather around hydrothermal vents, hydrocarbon seeps, and whale falls. He may elucidate what a whale fall is later if you don't know. Across 4 billion years from the recent to the Archean. Near the outset of his career, Dr. Little co-authored a joint paper with Professor Mike Benton entitled Early Jurassic Mass Extinction, a Global Long-Term Event, in which he summarised some of his findings from a PhD on the Pliensbachian-Terracian extinction. To this day, he's maintained a keen interest in what paleontologists now commonly refer to as the Terracian oceanic event, which, as you will hear, has significant import for our understanding of the Strawberry Bank Lagerstätte, and indeed the inverse may also be true. Dr. Little and I started to discuss working together just prior to my 2019 excavation at Strawberry Bank, and though the recent pandemic has thrown a spanner in the works, we're developing plans for new research into the invertebrate fauna and sedimentology of the site. So I'll hand over to Chris for him to set Strawberry Bank in its broader geological context.
Thank you very much for that introduction, Matt. So I'm just going to share my screen now and start the PowerPoint presentation going. Can you see that okay, Matt? If you could just confirm that.
Yeah, it's coming through.
That's good. That's great. Okay, so yes, I'm the third person in the series who is going to talk about Strawberry Bank. Previously, Mike Benton has talked about Mesozoic marine reptiles in a larger context, and then Benjamin Moon talked in more detail about ichthyosaurs and ichthyosaur skulls, and particularly those found from Strawberry Bank. So my task today is to talk a little bit more about Strawberry Bank, but to put it in context geologically, and I hope to show you during the talk that Strawberry Bank is actually a site of exceptional preservation that co-occurs with other sites of exceptional preservation from the same age, although actually with different sorts of sedimentary structures and facies, and also occurring in widely different places. So the talk structure here is Strawberry Bank, Lagerstätte, why, when, and what. And then I'll talk about some other examples of equivalent age, including the Yorkshire coast, not too far away from where I'm talking today, the Posidonia Shale in Germany, and then further afield, a site called Yaha in British Columbia in Canada. I'm going to finish my talk by suggesting why these events, these exceptional sites of preservation, co-occur in geological history, and that's linked to a time of very large igneous eruptions way to the south of the areas that we're going to talk about today, and I'll show you how far-field effects from this large igneous province caused the exceptional preservation that I'm going to discuss in the first part of this talk. So just a few background things here. So it's very difficult, obviously, for me to judge the background of people in the audience. Some of you may know something about geology, others may not. So I'm going to try and keep things relatively simple, but if you do have detailed questions about anything in the geology that I'm talking about, I'd be really happy to answer questions at the end of the talk. So firstly, what is a Lagerstätte? It's a German word and it means store place. And it's defined as some sedimentary deposits that have exceptional fossils that are exceptionally preserved, often with soft tissue. Normally in the fossil record, we don't find complete fossils. They tend to disarticulate because of they're broken down by high energy events or by animals burrowing into sediment. And soft tissue preservation is extremely rare. And yet, these sites of exceptional preservation, these Lagerstätte, are really important, geologically speaking, because they give us insights that we would not otherwise get from the geological record, including what whole animals looked like, including a record of animals which are only composed of soft tissue, things like worms and insects, for example, which generally don't get preserved. And also they give us insights into paleoecology. So, for example, how animals were interacting with each other, what ate what, and the soft tissues, the internal organs and behaviors of extinct animals. So, the Terracian is the last geological stage of the Lower Jurassic, and we're going to talk about a particular ammonite biozone within the Terracian, which is aged at about 184 million years ago. So what did the world look like 184 million years ago? This is a stretched out paleogeographic map from about that period of time, and you'll notice that the continents are really difficult to distinguish, our modern continents, and that's because most of them were squashed together into a giant supercontinent called Pangaea. And that included Australia, it included Antarctica, it included Africa and South America. And most of Pangaea was distributed south of the equator. In the northern part of the hemisphere at the time, in the northern hemisphere, we had North America and then Siberia and China. And these were separated from Pangaea by a big triangular shaped ocean called the Tethys Ocean. The Tethys Ocean is now almost completely destroyed now, but still remains as a little bit of our modern day Mediterranean. And then the ancient equivalent of our modern Pacific Ocean, it was called Panthalassa. And basically that comprised the other half of the globe. Three sites that I'm going to talk about today: Strawberry Bank, the North Yorkshire coast, and the Posidonia Shale in Germany, come from the European margin or European area. And Europe at that time was a series of small islands surrounded by shallow seas. And marching around on those small islands were dinosaurs, and flying around in the sky were pterosaurs. And then the seas were alive with typical Mesozoic animals, including things like ammonites and belemnites, which are a type of fossilized squid, and the marine reptiles that I'm going to show you from some of these exceptional preserved sites. So you'll see in terms of paleogeography, these three sites are actually fairly close together at the time. The Yaha timber site over here was actually on the margin on the Panthallassic Ocean. So that actually gives us a record a long way away from our European record. And I'll try and point out towards the end of the lecture why that's important. Okay, so let's have a look at Strawberry Bank in more detail. Where is Strawberry Bank? It is in the little town of Ilminster in Somerset. So here is a map putting that in context, obviously not too far away from where you are in Bath, but longer away from where I am in Leeds. And this marks the Jurassic outcrop, at least in the southwest of England. So this is a stratigraphic log of the Terracian of Strawberry Bank. And one thing to point out straight away is that you see this meter scale here shows you that this stratigraphy is actually pretty thin. It's only a few meters thick. And that comprises the Terracian of that area. So I just want to point out a few terms here. So that's the Terracian that we were talking about just now, the last stage of the Lower Jurassic. These are ammonite biozones, and of particular importance in this story is this one here called the falciparum, or sometimes the semi-celatum zone. In terms of Strawberry Bank, in the falciparum zone during that period of time was laid down a layer called the reptile bed, or alternatively the fish and saurian zone. And that is actually a concretionary limestone. I'll show you a picture of it just now, from where we find the exceptionally preserved fossils that I'm going to talk about. Either side of this limestone with the exceptional fossils are marine clays and muds, which Matt told you just now we have some research interest in to try and understand what the faunas are like both before and after this site of exceptional preservation. Okay, so Matt alluded to this in his introduction just now. They did an excavation at Strawberry Bank to rediscover a site which was first excavated, or fossils were described from there by a 19th century geologist called Charles Moore. And Matt's talk, the fourth in the series, is going to give the history of this site in much greater detail, and I'm sure he's going to talk about Charles Moore in a lot of detail. So this layer here, which is exposed in their excavations, is the fish and saurian layer from where the exceptionally preserved fossils come from. Now, you can see there are a few ammonites preserved on top of this bed here. And you can also see that it's a discontinuous concretionary layer. Concretions are layers, hard layers, which are formed by minerals percolating through pre-existing sediments and turning them into very hard stone. And concretions often yield nice fossils. And in this case, they yield the most incredible fossils. So they yield three-dimensionally preserved marine reptiles, including ichthyosaurs that Benjamin Moon talked about in the previous talk. And in terms of exceptional preservation, you'll see that the exceptional preservation in these animals here is because you have fully articulated skeletons. So there is the skull there. Here we see the spine. Here we see the ribs all in place, and here you see the front paddle with all of the delicate little finger bones in place. There are also marine crocodiles as well, things called Thalattosuchian crocodiles. Thalattosuchians were fully marine crocodiles with very long, skinny bodies and really long upper and lower jaws with lots of sharp, pointy teeth in them. And these animals would have been fish and squid hunting specialists, and there were more marine than any crocodiles that we see today. These are some fish fossils from the Strawberry Bank concretionary layer. This is a large fish called Pachycormis. That's the skull here, and this is the forward part of the body. And you'll marvel, hopefully, at the exceptional preservation. So not only is this fish here three-dimensionally preserved, so it's basically uncrushed, but also you see all sorts of really delicate details. So, for example, here is one of the pectoral fins. And you'll see the really, really fine detail which is preserved in this fossil. This is the underside, it's the ventral side of another specimen. And you can see all of the tiny little scales which are preserved in the skin of this fish. And some of these fish also preserved mineralized muscle. And that is just really very, very rare to find such exceptional preservation, both of the soft tissues of the animals, also by having three-dimensionally preserved skeletons, So that combination of things is really very rare indeed. Leptolepis, this is a small fish here, sort of herring-like animal, which is very common from Mesozoic seas. So in addition to fish, there are also invertebrate fossils as well. So this thing here is what's called a gladius, which is essentially like the pen that you find inside of a squid. So this is a squid-like animal here. And this dark material in the center is actually a fossilized ink sac, still in place 184 million years after this animal died. So not only are there marine invertebrates and marine vertebrates, there are also insects which are preserved in the strawberry bank material. So here is a beetle, and you can see that it has the abdomen here, and there is the thorax, and there is the head, so that is preserved almost completely intact. And there are a variety of wings of different sorts of insects as well. This is a dragonfly forewing, that's a grasshopper forewing. These are paired wing cases of a bug, and that's a plant hopper wing. And you can imagine, you see the scale here, these are only a few millimeters in size, and it's really, you can imagine how delicate these things are, and these have been preserved in this site of exceptional preservation. So the question is, how do you get this exceptional preservation? What does it mean? Well, the first thing that has to have happened in preserving these animals is that you must have had what's called rapid diagenesis. Diagenesis is basically turning soft tissue into mineral. So you must have had very early mineral replacement of the soft tissues of the animals for them to get preserved in the geological record. A lot of these soft tissues that have been preserved in phosphates. They've been phosphatized, and that's actually quite common in sites of exceptional preservation in the geological record. Another thing that you see in these nodules that contain the exceptionally preserved animals is lamination. So this is a petrographic thin section. So this is a slice of rock which has been polished very, very thinly, so you can see almost all the way through it. And you may be able to make out that there are lines of minerals here. So this is what we call lamination. And what this means is that when the sediments were laid down, originally, they were not bioturbated. They were not disturbed by any animals which were working through the sediment. And that is important when I talk about the significance of the sites of exceptional preservation later on. And the fact that these things are in concretions means that there was early lithification. And what that prevented was later crushing due to compaction, basically turning those limestones or those lime muds into limestone, would have compacted the fossils and squashed them flat, but for the fact that these concretions formed very early on, and that protected the fossils from being squashed flat later on. So we see, or we think we have evidence here for rapid diagenesis, for lamination, no disturbance of the sediment, and also for very early lithification in concretions. So having those three things together is exceptional in itself, but there's another part to this whole story which I'll come back to towards the end of the lecture. So let's move on in terms of geography. So now moving from Strawberry Bank, which is number 2 on this map here, and going up to the North Yorkshire coast. So if any of you know the North Yorkshire coast, around Whitby, for example, you'll know that there are spectacular sea cliffs there, which are formed out of Jurassic rocks. This is one site here called Kettle Nest. That's me here looking down at my feet, looking for fossils. And you'll see that the rocks formed in the cliff here are dark grey. They're actually formed of shales. So quite a different sort of lithology from the rocks that you see at Strawberry Bank. All of these rocks that we're seeing here are Terracian in age, and that's another difference between the rocks, the Terracian rocks in the North Yorkshire coast and at Strawberry Bank, in that in North Yorkshire, the Terracian sequence is much, much thicker. So this is a stratigraphic log here, and you may be able to see the scale that the equivalent rocks, which are only a few meters thick in Strawberry Bank, are over 150 meters thick in the Yorkshire coast. So the coastline of North Yorkshire has been worked industrially for hundreds of years. It's a fairly quiet place now, inhabited mainly by tourists and fishermen, but not too long ago, these cliffs were a hive of industrial activity. So in the lower part of the Terracian, in the falciferum biozone that I talked about earlier on, those cliffs were worked for the gemstone called jet, which is basically petrified wood that the Victorians were particularly interested in making jewelry from. And then the later part of the Terracian here, what's called the alum shale member, you can see that there are actually a whole load of pits in the cliff here. And what was happening here is that people were mining the alum shale. And they would take the shale and they would burn it in giant mounds, and then they would take the burned shale and they would mix it with urine collected from the local villages, and that would liberate alum from the shale. And then alum was used as a fixative in the woolen dyeing industry. It's a mordant. And the industry died when people found that actually you could make mordants in a more efficient way. So what we've got left with now are lots and lots of places on the cliffs where there were old alum workings. And because there was so much working of the cliffs, both for jet and also for alum, is that people found wonderful fossils from the Terracian part of the cliffs. This is one of my pictures here. This shows a quite typical fossil from the Terracian on the Yorkshire coast. So this is an ammonite, a thing called Harpoceros. You'll see that it's nice and shiny gold color here because it's been replaced by the mineral pyrite. So iron sulfide. You also might notice that this is not three-dimensionally preserved. It's actually almost squashed flat. And that's because many of the fossils on the Yorkshire coast are not preserved in the same way as they are in Strawberry Bank deposit. So they tend to be squashed flat. There are a few layers of concretions, but they're nowhere near as common as the Strawberry Bank, and they don't contain as many exceptionally preserved fossils. But nonetheless, there are fossils which you would normally think as being exceptionally preserved because they have all of the skeletal elements together. So here is a nice example of a Thalattosaucian crocodile. So the ones that I showed you just now from Strawberry Bank, there was a juvenile one and then an adult one with the skull. And here you can see an adult specimen, which is almost complete. So you'll see, as I said earlier on, these Thalattosaucian crocodiles were long and skinny, and they had relatively small scutes or bony plates along their backs, and then their limbs, their forelimbs and their hind limbs, were modified into paddles rather than being the sort of feet that you see on modern crocodiles. So these were highly developed, evolved to be marine creatures. So we see Thalattosaucians in the Terracian on the Yorkshire coast. We also see ichthyosaurs. This is a preserved one. Again, you can see it's being crushed. And there are plesiosaurs as well. So here we see 3 different genera of plesiosaurs. This one has a particularly long neck and small head. Then there are occasionally fish as well. So some of the fish, like Saurincus here, had very, very long snouts. So they were a little bit like billfish today, or swordfish, but they had lots and lots of small teeth rather than being toothless. Tycholepis, this is another quite common fish from that period of time. That's the whole specimen there. And this is a detail of the skin of that fish, and you'll see lots and lots of these little scales all overlapping and preserved on this specimen. Lepidotes is quite a typical Mesozoic fish in that it has these large scales, these tile-like scales covering the body. And again, you can see on this specimen, there's the articulated head, and you'll see the body here with all of the scales in place. So we can see quite similar fish and also marine reptiles to those that we see in Strawberry Bank, but the preservation isn't quite as good on the Yorkshire coast. So we don't see that, they're often crushed, and we don't see such good preservation of things like scales with skin. Okay, so moving on again. So the sites that we were talking about just now are Strawberry Bank and the sites on the North Yorkshire coast. But now we're going to move across into the European continent and talk about the Posidonia Shale. And the Posidonia Shale was deposited in a series of sedimentary basins from North Germany all the way through to southern Germany here. And the deposits that were formed during the Terracian time period are called the Posidonia Shale or Posidonia Schiefer. That's the German word for it. This is a log of the Posidonian Schiefer from one of the quarries in southern Germany. And again, you'll see that there are lots and lots of, the stratigraphy here is one which is mostly of laminated shales. This is one of the clay pits that used to be worked for these laminated shales. And the reason that they worked for these laminated shales was for tiles, for roofs, but also as an ornamental stone. So there were many of these quarries in Germany, particularly in the southern part of Germany. Most of these are not working anymore, but a few of them are, and they're now actually sites where people can pay and go and collect fossils. Holzmaden is a particularly well-known one. So you'll see people here are splitting the shale here, the laminated shales, looking for fossils. And because there were many of these quarries in southern Germany at the time, and they were hand-worked, is that many beautiful fossils, exceptionally preserved fossils, have been and continue to be found in the Posidonian Shale. And I'm just going to show a variety of these now. So they include animals which would have been living in some of the little islands that were surrounding the seas at the time, including this little thing here, which is a pterosaur. And pterosaurs were very light flying reptiles, and they had hollow bones. So it's really unusual to find pterosaurs, particularly ones which are preserved with most of the bones intact, like this one here. The Posidonia Shale is really famous for its ichthyosaurs, and ichthyosaurs which show all of the bones articulated, like this one here, but also specimens which show the fossilized skin of the ichthyosaur. So here we see a specimen where you can see the outline of the dorsal fin that didn't have any bones in it, and then the tail fluke here, which is typical of ichthyosaurs. And it's these exceptional preserved ichthyosaurs that have really given us an idea about what the morphology of ichthyosaurs would have been like when they were alive in terms of their soft tissue. They also show poignant things as well. So, for example, this is a female ichthyosaur which died giving birth to a juvenile, which is still just in the birth canal here, just coming out of the birth canal. So some of these ichthyosaurs give you really amazing insights into the biology of ichthyosaurs and other exceptionally preserved animals from the Terracian time period. You might notice here that this specimen is also crushed as well. So concretions are also relatively rare in the Posidonia Shale. So most of our exceptionally preserved fossils here are not in 3 dimensions. They tend to be crushed. And that makes them sometimes a little bit difficult to work on. Fish fossils are also famous from the Posidonia Shale. So here we have a fish called Dapidium. And again, you can see typical of these Mesozoic fish is that they have these large tile-like scales covering the body. This genus here is a relatively deep-bodied animal, and you can see it has quite a large head, and you might be able to make out these sharp, pointy teeth here. So this is almost like a equivalent of a I've forgotten the name of them, the fish that live in the Amazon that strip flesh off things. And shark fossils, thank you. So shark fossils are also common from the Posidonia Shale. So this is a shark genus called Hybodus, common from the Mesozoic. So you'll see that it has the outline of all of the fins here. And some of the Hybodus fossils that we find in the Posidonia Shale actually have stomach contents. So we know that Hybodus, the ancient shark, was eating things like belemnites, these ancient squid-like animals in the past. So invertebrate fossils are also found in the Posidonia Shale, and they give us also really amazing insights into the life of the animals in the sea at the time. So we find ammonites. This one is also pyritized here. And on this ammonite are a whole load of epifauna. It's basically animals which were attached onto the shell of the ammonite as it was floating around in the water column. And when the ammonite died, its shell sank onto the sea floor. And we still have the remnants of those animals that were attached onto the shell when it was alive. We find complete belemnites. So some of you may be aware of belemnites. There are these bullet-like fossils made out of calcium carbonate that are found in Jurassic and Cretaceous rocks. And here we actually have a record of a complete belemnite. So that is the normal bit that you'd find. And then forward of that, there is the body of the belemnite, and then there are a series of arms here, 8 arms, with paired hooks on either side of the arm. And there's actually an amazing fossil from the Posidonia Shale that shows one of these belemnites that died while it was grappling a fish. So you can actually see a fish trapped in the arms of the belemnite. And then we also have preservation of really small, delicate fossils as well, terrestrial fossils. This is a fossil cockroach. And you can see that it looks really morphologically very similar to a cockroach that you might be frightened running across your floor today. Right, so moving away from Europe now. So there's Yorkshire and Strawberry Bank and southwest Germany. Now we're going to go across over to the Panthalassic Ocean in the Terracian to a site called Jahrhunter, which has recently been discovered and published. So the Terracian rocks of Jahrhunter are also these dark shales, and they have the same biozones where we find a lot of the exceptionally preserved fossils, but exceptionally preserved fossils at Jahrhunter also occur in slightly older rocks as well. There are also marine shales. And those exceptionally preserved animals include ichthyosaurs. So this is the vertebral column and the ribs of an ichthyosaur. They include they're not three-dimensional, they're mostly crushed. They include fish. So that's the head of a teleost fish, and there you can see the ribs and the spine on that specimen. They include crinoids or feather stars. This is a thing called Sirocrinus, and normally feather stars are very delicate indeed, and they would fall apart really quickly. So the fact that you have one, this is the head of the crinoid here, the calyx of the crinoid, and the fact that you can see all of the arms and all of the little pinnules on here shows that preservation must have been very rapid. Now, what I forgot to say when I was talking about the Posidonian sheath was about these crinoids. And so I'm just going to go back and just talk about this specimen here. So this specimen is a piece of wood. So I'm not sure if you can actually see this. It's actually covered over by some toolbar here. But hopefully you can see that on the top of this image, there is a horizontal black layer, and that is a piece of wood. And attached onto it are these crinoids with extremely long stems. And this is a crinoid called Sirocrinus. And Sirocrinus is what we call a pseudoplanktonic crinoid. And what that means is that it attached onto these logs when they were floating on the surface layers of the ocean. And then they hung down underneath the log and they filter fed particles out of seawater. And after a period of time, that log would have become waterlogged and sunk onto the seafloor, and then these crinoids would get preserved. So not only are there pseudoplanktonic crinoids on these pieces of wood, there are also bivalves as well. So this layer here is formed of a series of bivalves, a bit like mussels that attached onto the wood while it was also floating. So anyway, going back to Yarhartinda again, this crinoid here belongs to the same species of pseudoplanktonic crinoid that we see in the Posidonian Shale. And actually, we also find them on the Yorkshire coast as well. Other Yarhartinda exceptionally preserved fossils include cephalopods. These are squid-like relatives, two different genera here. And the gladius, or the pen of this species here, is actually preserved by phosphate minerals. And then in the center of this specimen, and also this one here, are the preserved ink sacs. So again, it's really incredible to find such a level of preservation in the geological record. This specimen here, you can see there's a curve here, that's a body of a shrimp, and then these are the shrimp arms. And these fossils here are also preserved in phosphate. These here are two different sorts of lobsters. You can see the tail of this lobster here, so be recognizable compared to modern lobsters. And then forward of this are the chelicerae, or the pincers. And then these lobsters here had a rather wide carapace. And these species and genera, we can find them in the same ones in the Posidonian Shale, and also occasionally in Yorkshire as well. So in terms of the diversity of species that we see in Yarhartinda, in Canada, and also in Germany and Yorkshire, and to some extent in strawberry bank fauna, they're all actually rather similar, but that's probably what you'd expect because they're all the same age. So the question is, why do we have exceptional preservation in a particular biozone in the Terracian time period? And why do we find these sites of exceptional preservation found scattered across many places across the globe? And in recent years, people have come to a consensus that the main driver for exceptional preservation and also associated extinction at the time in the marine realm was caused by outpouring of enormous volumes of lava in the southern part of Pangaea at the time. So in the southern part of Pangaea, the arrow here shows that we had Australia, East Antarctica, and Africa joined together. And about 184 million years ago, for several million years, there were enormous eruptions of lava, both in East Africa, and that's called the Farrar Large Igneous Province, and then in the Karoo area of South Africa, and that's all called the Karoo Large Igneous Province. So because they're the same age here, they're lumped together into one, and we call this the Karoo-Farrar Large Igneous Province. And it's estimated that about 2.5 million cubic kilometers of lava erupted in the southern part of Pangaea over several million years in the early part of the Terracian stage. So why is that linked to exceptional preservation? Now, before I explain that, here are just a couple of shots of what these large igneous provinces look like. So this here, this paler material, is an igneous intrusion into coal-rich rocks in East Antarctica. And here we have a whole series of lava flows in the Karoo Basin in South Africa. Now, the injection of igneous magma, molten rock, into coal-rich beds, you can imagine, would cook the coal up and release an awful lot of carbon dioxide. And in fact, carbon dioxide is the main kill mechanism and the reason that we have these sites of exceptional preservation. Now, this rather complicated scheme here tells you how large igneous provinces lead to sites of exceptional preservation in the Terracian and also marine mass extinction. Now, I'm not going to go through all of these feedbacks here. I'm just going to follow the pathway marked in red here to sites of exceptional preservation in the Terracian. So, an eruption of large igneous provinces, huge amount of volcanic rocks being injected onto the land surface and also into rocks at a particular period of time, leads to huge amounts of carbon dioxide being released into the atmosphere. And we know, of course, the downside to that is that carbon dioxide released into the atmosphere causes global warming. So there would have been, and we actually have geochemical evidence for global warming during the Terracian time period. So global warming leads to reduced thermohaline circulation because it causes the higher latitudes to warm up, and that means there is less temperature difference between the higher and lower latitudes, and that means that the oceans don't turn over as rapidly, and that leads to the oceans becoming more stagnant. Also, dissolved oxygen decreases as the oceans warm up as well, and that leads to ocean stagnation and eventually marine anoxia. So oxygen levels start to decrease in a lot of marine basins. And when you reduce oxygen in seawater, it leads to this. So this is a painting by James Mackay of what the seafloor would have looked like in quite a lot of places during the Terracian time period. So basically, there was almost no oxygen in the sediments, and there was very little oxygen in the lower layers of the ocean. So when animals died from living in the surface layers of the ocean and they sank onto the sea floor, there was little or no oxygen. And that would have done several things. Firstly, it would have stopped the carcasses of the animals decaying bacterially. Secondly, there were no scavenging animals to eat the carcasses that fell onto the sea floor, because normally any carcasses that fall onto the sea floor today are rapidly eaten by scavenging animals. And also, there were no animals that were living in the sediment to churn up those fossils when they became buried in later sedimentary layers. So this is why we think that there were many sites of exceptional preservation, including Strawberry Bank, in the Terracian time period. It was due to global warming and marine oxia caused by the Karoo-Farrar large igneous province eruptions. And that's where I'm going to leave my talk, and I'll be very happy to answer any questions that people might have. So I will stop sharing my screen now and go back to Zoom.
Thank you very much, Chris. Normally there'd be a round of applause, I no doubt, at this moment, but everyone is mic'd up. If everyone would like to remove their mics and give Chris a round of applause, that may work, but I'm not sure whether this generally works on that. Mics are clearing. And I think there are around. Doesn't work terribly well over mic, but thank you very much. I personally really enjoyed that talk, and I'm happy to relay questions to you. If you could either put your video screens on to raise your hand, or raise your hand using the facility within Zoom, you can do that, or you can put a question within the chat. I do have a question in chat from Jude Harris. She was interested where she might be able to see more of the Kettleness and Whitby fossils. Which museums are they well represented in, Chris?
So they are in the Whitby Museum, has got a quite nice collection. And they are also in the Yorkshire Museum in York, has got a nice collection as well. And of course, there are also fossils from Whitby in the Natural History Museum as well. So the amazing wall of ichthyosaurs that you see in the Natural History Museum in London has some specimens from Whitby on it.
Thank you. Thank you. Do we have other questions? Anyone have a question to put to Chris? There's one from Andrew Ward here. On the map of locations, there was, oh, they're coming in freaking fast now. On the map of locations, there was a number 3 close to Bristol. Where was
that? So let me just go back to my presentation because I can't remember off the top of my head. I'll have a quick look.
I noted that location as well, and
number 3 is that's north of Bristol, so that could well be Dundry. So Dundry Hill has got a nice section through the Terracian.
Yeah. There is a location at Dunkerton as well. That has a Terracian outlier that Charles Moore studied, although that's far less famous. But Brodie's insects, many of Brodie's insect specimens came from there. Are there any good books that discuss these fossil sites in a little more detail? Says Gordon Neighbour.
As it happens, there is this one. This is with my Paleontological Association hat on. So this was published last year, and it is really good for the lower lias of the Yorkshire coast. And there is an equivalent one of Dorset as well. So there's an excellent guide to Dorset. And then recently published, there is a Kimmeridge one as well by the Paleontological Association. So I really recommend those field guides to the some of the well-known fossil sites. And you can get them from the Paleontological Association online bookshop.
I believe our former speaker, Ben Moon, wrote the section on ichthyosaurs in the Kimmeridge book, which is from the wonderful Steve Etch's collection. So yeah, I can thoroughly recommend any of those publications. Where do the street marine reptiles fit in of mid-Somerset?
They are actually older, so the street sections come from the either the Cinemurian or the Hitangian. I think it's the Cinemurian. So that's actually the lower part of the lower lias. The fascies, in terms of the rocks, they're also organic, rich, and sometimes laminated shales. So the preservation style is actually rather similar, but they record marine reptiles from a slightly older part of the Lower Jurassic.
Okay, thanks. We've seen a lot. This is from Liz Vincent. The former question was from John Dickinson. Thank you, John. This is from Liz Vincent. We've seen a lot of animals, but only one bit of plant, wood. Are there any fossilized seaweeds, etc.?
I think there are some things that people have described as being seaweeds. I don't think the evidence is very good. And also, things that used to be described as seaweeds, the so-called fucoids, turns out to be bioturbation. They turn out to be animal burrows. So, for example, there's a trace fossil called chondrites, which is quite common in the Terracian, in fact, in many rocks in the Phanerozoic. And when they were first described, they were thought to be fucoids, in other words, seaweeds, but we now know that they have quite a different origin. So I actually think, now I'm really struggling to think of any time when seaweeds are well preserved. They really, because they're quite nice to eat, and therefore they break down quite quickly. So seaweeds just don't tend to get preserved. That's not true of seagrass. So seagrass seems to be more resistant. So there is quite a good fossil record of seagrass, but it actually evolved much later. So in the late part of the Mesozoic, and wasn't found in the Jurassic.
Charles Moore, funnily enough, did describe or did say in passing that he had specimens of fruits from Strawberry Bank. Having gone through a lot of his material, including the once missing insect specimens, which I'll cover in my own talk, the history of, I didn't see anything that convinced me that it was of vegetable kingdom. I just couldn't.
So if you remember, Matt, we also found those strange black squiggles as well, which I think some people thought could well be seaweeds, but I think it's actually squid ink myself. But
yeah,
we were going to do something with those, weren't we? In terms of
I agree.
People,
we may yet. Yes. Then 2020 happened. Right. I have a further question. Could you explain how colour, squid ink, and pattern in the insect wings are preserved through fossilization?
The colour of the squid ink is because it is melanin, and it is the actual compound which is still present in the ink, so that's why it's black. And there are these great stories of, I can't remember who now, but someone in the 19th century was a fan of taking this fossilized squid ink and mixing it with water and then writing with it.
More did it too.
Did he? Okay, yeah. It seems to be quite a popular thing for Victorian paleontologists to do. So that is it's sort of like color in a way, because melanin is a contributor towards pigmentation in vertebrates and invertebrates as well. The preservation of the insects, for example, that will be broken down products of chitin, so the material which the insects were actually made out of. So that's not actually replicating color, it's representing the replacement of the chitin. I don't know whether people have actually done analysis on those, but there are rocks of equivalent age where people have analyzed fossilized insects and found that there are remnants of that chitin. It's been transformed over time a little bit, but it's a byproduct of breakdown of chitin.
There are some on some of the Strawberry Bank insects. There are actually some what appear to be pigmented spots on the spotty plantoppers, and I assume that too is melanin within the wings as a pigment.
I suspect that's the case. Yeah, it seems to be extremely resistant, melanin.
If you search around online, folk, and you want to hear someone talking about melanin, you'll probably find Mike Benton on several YouTube videos talking about melanin's preservation potential in fossils, because he's done a lot of work with dinosaur pigmentation, and it's the same thing.
If you want to see some truly amazing proper color in fossil insects, look at Messel oil shale from the Eocene from Germany, and you'll be blown away by the pigmentation which is present on some of those shiny beetles that look like they could have died yesterday. Amazing.
Yeah, it's superb stuff. Andrew Ward asks, where is a good place to see some of the Strawberry Bank fossils?
I think that's over to you, isn't it, Matt?
In the room in which I'm sitting now is the answer to that. Until October the 3rd, currently 5 days a week, Monday to Friday, but soon to be, I believe, Monday to Saturday, you can come and see the best Strawberry Bank fossils there are, and some of the only Strawberry Bank fossils there are, on display at the Bath Royal Literary and Scientific Institution, which is at 16 to 18 Queen Square. The exhibition is free, and it's very good, and I say that because I wrote it myself, along with Jude Harris, who's present here tonight. I'm very pleased with the exhibition, and I'd be delighted for all of you to come and see it. The fossils themselves are spectacular, and they really are not found in any other collection, because Charles Moore was the only person that collected from the site, and we have Charles Moore's collection. So please do come and see it if you have the opportunity. In the coming year, I'm hoping that I will put the full content of the exhibition, including lots of beautiful photographs, up online, so that if you can't physically get into the exhibition, the talks from this series, along with the full content of the exhibition, should be on the BRLSI's new website. I believe that is the last of the questions, Chris, unless anyone is interjecting at the final moment.
I don't know, I may add just a little addendum to Liz Vincent's question, is that although we talked about seaweeds not really having a fossil record, that's not true of other plant materials. So leaves, for example, do get preserved in the fossil record, and there are some quite nice examples of leaves in some of the Terracian deposits, but usually only the ones which were fairly close to land. And that's also true of insects, is that we have almost no record at all of insects from the Yorkshire coast. And that's probably because the land mass was rather far away, whereas we think that Strawberry Bank was actually pretty close to the seashore at the time. And you can imagine that when you're closer to a landmass, you'll just collect more terrestrial animals, including, and also plants as well.
I have to admit, I was hoping sincerely for a pterosaur from our excavation, but it didn't come. Maybe from a future excavation. Chris, thank you ever so much. It's absolutely fascinating talk, and great to set the Strawberry Bank Lagerstätte in a broader geological context. I'm sure I speak for everyone when I say that I thoroughly enjoyed it, and thank you so much for your time and your effort in putting it together.
Thank you.